All right. So we've talked a little bit about PhD programs, and that's clearly not for everybody. So, assuming that you're not going to be applying to a PhD program, what are you going to do instead? Well, presumably you're going to be applying for some kind of job. And this is a part of the class where I do my best, but this is not my area of expertise. As I mentioned earlier, I haven't applied for a job outside of academia since I was a teenager. And so this is not something, no matter how much I read and look at resources, I'm not an expert about applying for jobs. What you want to do is, first of all, get yourself connected with some sources for information that are going to be more authoritative than I am. For instance, this is my single favorite website for looking at not job listings, but general information for finding jobs as a linguist or as somebody with some kind of a languages, linguistics, and culture kind of a degree. This is from a specialized master's program at Georgetown University that's geared towards teaching sociolinguistics, but then also placing people into industry jobs afterwards. Well, not just industry, but sort of all kinds of non-academic jobs afterwards with a master's degree. And they have put together this really nice website of resources. Some of these are things you'll need a Georgetown account to get into, but most of them are links that you can freely follow. And some of it is specialized or geared towards people who do sociolinguistics, but not all of it. A lot of this is still going to be really, really highly relevant, even if that's not your specialization at all. And you'll find all sorts of interesting things on this website. They have a lot of practical materials for finding careers, for developing your application materials, things like that. So if you look around this website, there's going to be some overviews. There's going to be presentations from people who teach in this program. They have a listing of different kinds of organizations that might be worth checking here if you're looking for people who have hired linguists in the past. And even if your MA major is not linguistics, it's very likely that some of these same places are looking for language experts as well, or a TESOL kind of language education person. I don't think any of these are probably limited to basic linguistics. They also have tips on how to look for jobs, practical advice on interviewing, on cover letters, on resumes. These are all things that are worth looking at. These guys in this program just have a lot more information than I do about, best current practices in looking for jobs outside academia. So I would encourage you, if you're more focused on looking for a job and are not thinking about going to a PhD program, I would check out this website. Excuse me. It's one of the best resources that I've found that's specifically geared towards linguists, and it will also be relevant to anybody with a sort of language or teaching of languages based degree. So I think this will be relevant for TESOL students as well. Definitely worth taking a look at. This is U.S. oriented. This is going to be mostly focused on the job market in the United States. To get information about job market in other countries, you're going to need to hunt down sources that are from those specific countries. Basically, you're going to need to talk to somebody in the country of your choice, whether that's your home country or somewhere else. You're not going to necessarily be able to get information from our program or from any of us about those job markets. Okay. So what kinds of options are out there in terms of jobs for people with a master's degree from our program? Well, for people who do basic linguistics, so basically the MA in linguistics here, this would include a couple academic things. I've mentioned applying to grad school. We do get some number of students who do that. There are also some sorts of research jobs that you can find that are, not quite as much of a commitment as applying to a PhD program, but where you end up maybe working in a linguistics lab or something like that. And that would be a really nice opportunity to get to see what day-to-day research is like in the field, learn a bit more about it, but also get paid like a normal employee. You don't, have to commit to doing 5 years and writing a book or anything like that. You do get some of these jobs that pop up specifically on the linguist list. You see these sometimes, or they can be sometimes advertised on other networks. Not very common, but they are out there, so it's worth keeping an eye on those lists. Most of the options with a master's degree are going to be in the non-academic world. Really, if you want to go into university teaching or something like that, the best advice is to try to get a doctorate for that. But with the master's degree, there's all sorts of options open to you in the non-academic world that could include kindergarten through 12th grade education. So there are lots of people out there with master's degrees who are teachers, whether that's in a public school or a private school. That's a very common career. Tech companies are a big source of employment now for people with linguistics background. And of course, if you have some ability to do coding or some quantitative expertise, it certainly makes it easier to get one of these jobs. But there are also technology companies all over the world out there who are hiring linguists or language experts to be subject experts, and you don't need to have any kind of special coding ability or technical ability to do those jobs. They just want somebody who's an expert on a language or an expert on the structure of language to talk to the people who are doing the engineering and to communicate back and forth with them. There are a lot of technology jobs out there. Marketing and communications is a big area. You can see some of those jobs listed on the Georgetown website that I've just mentioned here. A lot of the jobs that get advertised on the linguist list are either at tech companies or at marketing kinds of companies, or somewhere in between, companies that are doing both of these. This one, IR, institutional research, this is a big, big area. Basically, any organization that's large enough to be complicated has some people working for it whose job is to organize the way that to research the way the organization runs. These jobs are generally referred to as institutional research, and every large organization has IR jobs. This would be anything from a university to a museum to government agencies to private companies to nonprofits to, say, a library system. Really, any large organization will have institutional research jobs. It's a broad sector. They're looking for people with the kinds of critical reasoning and problem-solving skills that you get in an MA program like ours. And so this is a good sector to look in. These are also interesting jobs. These are jobs where you get to analyze things and try to improve them. And so if you get an IR job at an organization that you think is a good organization whose mission you agree with, then this is a job where you're really doing something to advance the interests of something you care about. There are, some number of jobs in government. This is spelled incorrectly without the N. In government or intelligence or military analysis kinds of jobs. Many of these come with citizenship requirements, although not all of them. Certainly anything with the CIA or the FBI, I believe, is going to require a citizenship, although I'm not 100% certain about that. But there certainly are analyst jobs out there. The military in particular is often looking for people with specific language expertise in a critical language and some background in like a higher degree, like a master's degree in linguistics. There are lots of jobs like that. And just more generally, some government jobs within government agencies will have requirements like you need to have a master's degree, but it doesn't matter what the degree is in, right? And now those jobs will be open to you with a master's degree from our department. And finally here, the legal professions and legal services. And this could include anything from being, a paralegal who does sort of lawyerly work, but not at quite as high a level, to being a kind of expert consultant, because lawyers often need language experts to talk to or to even have them testify in court. There's a number of functions that need to get done in the legal world that can only be done by people with a certain amount of expertise in languages or linguistics. And so the legal professions are also a place to look for jobs. There's lots and lots of links and ideas from that website I just showed you, the Georgetown one. And then in terms of actually, oh, sorry, I forgot to say that that list I've just given you is also going to apply to applied linguistics as well, and TESOL for the most part. And of course, with applied linguistics or TESOL, there's a couple extra possibilities. Namely, obviously, you could go into language teaching, which you probably wouldn't do with a basic linguistics specialization. And then within the academic world, it's more likely to be able to get some kind of a job in a university in a language teaching kind of a role than it is in a linguistics role. And this is because for foreign language teaching in particular, many American universities will have lecturer or instructor or adjunct positions. These positions are where you're not really a professor, but you're teaching classes. You might be on a permanent contract or a shorter contract. You might be full-time, you might be part-time. It's often possible to find some kind of sub-professor level work at a university, much less likely in basic linguistics because we don't have that many undergraduates in basic linguistics and there's not that many classes to teach. So you generally don't find these sort of piecemeal academic jobs in basic linguistics. And in some countries, for applied linguistics or TESOL, it's even possible to get a permanent position at a university without having a doctoral degree. That is a vanishing possibility in the United States. There are still some subjects at some colleges that will hire people without a PhD. Like my sister-in-law, for instance, is a professor of landscape architecture at a large public university, doesn't have a PhD, but that's very, very unusual. And in linguistics and languages and literatures, that's going to be basically unheard of in the United States. But in some other countries, it may be possible to get a permanent university teaching job, teaching English or teaching a specific language, or maybe even teaching linguistics without a PhD. It really depends on local sort of customs and traditions. And so, yeah, in most of Europe, that's not going to happen. But, in Asia or in other parts of the world, in South America, it can be country by country. In some places, this is possible. In some places, it's not. Again, if you really want to go into the academic world, your best bet in the United States is to get a doctorate. And if you're looking to go into the academic world in another country, your best bet is to pursue graduate school in that foreign country for the most part, right? So I linked to that Georgetown website earlier in these slides. That is a really useful resource. I think it's the best career resource out there for linguists. There are a couple other things I wanted to share here. This one is the linguist list. I already showed you this when we were looking for conferences. It's also a very useful resource to look for job postings. I would guess that this moment in November of 2020, these job listings are going to be pretty weird at this particular moment because of the pandemic and the economic uncertainty. There's probably going to be a pretty strange mix of jobs up here right now, as well as in the United States at the moment, the permanent job market for tenure track professors is mostly canceled at this point because people aren't graduating on time. Universities are losing money. You don't want to be admitting new doctoral students right now for the most part, or hiring new professors. But here's what we happen to have at the moment. This is like the last 2 days of postings. There's an internship. That's American code word for unpaid job. I don't think I'd recommend that anybody do that. This is telling you that, hey, our PhD program has financial support if you want to apply to do a PhD in, it looks like German or maybe German studies. These are professor jobs. These are generally going to require a doctorate. This one's in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as far as I'm aware, is not one of the places where you can get a permanent university position without a doctorate. But if you wanted to know, you could click through. and I'm guessing this probably requires a PhD. They'll give you all of these sort of field settings and then a text description of the job. Have a PhD or equivalent in linguistics. So that's what you'd expect. Yeah, here's an industry job, British English specialization, so probably not applicable to anybody in the class, but you'll find announcements like this for many other languages. And what they're looking for is somebody who's a native or near native speaker in the language, as well as having some general linguistics background. Appin and Butler Hill, I think, is a technology staffing firm that you're going to end up being farmed out to another technology company, but you can click on it, read through, see what kinds of jobs are out there. This is probably not a wonderful job. You're on a 6-month contract. Yeah, I wonder if this is the kind of a job where they're farming you out to a rich technology company while avoiding paying you a full salary or something like that. Anyway, these are the kinds of jobs that show up here. You can browse through this list at will. You can, of course, sort by different kinds of filters here if you're looking for a specific kind of job. The linguist list is probably the most comprehensive listing of jobs involving linguistics, although not necessarily foreign languages. You might get better sources for foreign language jobs elsewhere. The BU Linguistics Department has a collection of links for sort of career resources for linguists. It's like a version of the Georgetown one, but probably not as comprehensive, but it's not a decent backup if you're sort of at a loss. You can go take a look here as well. They'll have similar kinds of resources there. And then if you're in applied linguistics or TESOL, this is one of the larger TESOL organizations in the world. They have a full career center here. You can get advice about how to start a career in TESOL. You can look for job postings. There's all sorts of possibilities on this website as well. So they do have job listings here. Well, I don't know exactly understand how to get to them, but they're here somewhere. And yeah, so you will be able to look for jobs on this website as well. That's obviously more centered around TESOL and language teaching than it is around linguistics. Yeah. So what is the application process like for a job? Well, I mean, it depends very much on what kind of a job you're applying for. There are as many processes as there are kinds of jobs. I can tell you about university faculty positions, whether that's a tenure track faculty position or a temporary one, because that's what I know. Those processes are extremely lengthy. So just like the grad school applications, you're usually filling out applications for university jobs almost a year before the job will start. Generally those are due sometime in the fall semester. You might get a preliminary interview where they talk to you on Zoom or on the phone or something like that for 10 or 15 minutes. For faculty kinds of jobs, more so if you're being hired as a researcher, although possibly as a teacher as well, you may be asked to make a campus visit out to the department where you're interviewing. This is less likely if you're applying for a lecturer or instructor kind of a job where it's not necessarily a permanent position. They're less likely to require this. Those campus visits can be extremely stressful. You're sort of meeting people in the department, interviewing with them. They're checking you out and trying to make sure that you're a decent person. And then at some point after they bring a few candidates through this process, they will pick one and make a job offer to them sometime in the spring in the general case, where you start next fall. For lecturer or instructor positions that are more of a per course basis or that are full-time jobs, but only for a limited term, this entire process is likely to be similar, but a little bit shorter, right? So you'll probably skip the campus visit part. You'll probably submit the application later in the winter or the spring. And, they might do one round of interviews and then make an offer pretty quick. So that will be a little bit shorter. And of course, other jobs outside academia are going to be much, much shorter than any academic jobs. We have an extremely long hiring cycle. If you're applying for a job at a technology company, they see your resume and they like it, they'll probably want to interview you within a week or two. And if they offer you the job, you need to make a decision within a day or two and be starting in 2 weeks. Right, so that's much more of a typical time frame for industry jobs. That will never happen at a university. Excuse me. In terms of what you have to submit to those jobs, you definitely have a resume everywhere that you apply. The academic version of a resume, which is referred to as a CV or curriculum vitae, is an extremely long document that lists all of your achievements and abilities. A resume, which is the sort of business version of that document, is maximally 1 page, I am told. And it is a much, much more concise summary of your experience and abilities. Some of those sites I've linked to in these slides will have much better advice than I can give you about preparing a resume. And then for academic applications, preparing your CV is not terribly important for you until you're already a doctorate and start applying for jobs. So I'm not going to go through that in this class. It is an important skill eventually, but it's not something that grad schools really look at very closely. And for the resume version of it, you're better off getting advice from somebody who isn't me, including the websites I've just linked to, which have some really excellent resources about building a resume for linguists and language experts specifically. Of course, for general advice on building a resume, there are hundreds of thousands of websites that can help you with that. What do jobs look like in our field? Well, so this is going to be basic linguistics, these data here. And this is from the government survey of doctoral programs known as IPEDS. And this is showing you, first of all, how many degrees are being issued in linguistics in the United States from the years 2000 to 2015. I found a more updated version of this chart, but it wasn't as visually appealing, and it just shows that everything has been flat for the next 2 years. So I didn't include that. This is a somewhat older one. Pattern is roughly the same, except that even this rising line has gone flat in the last few years. What this is showing you is the number of degrees issued. At the shortest arrows here are the doctoral level. This is the number of PhD degrees. This middle bar is showing you the master's level degrees that are being issued each year. And then this leftmost bar, which is rising the fastest, those are bachelor's or undergraduate level linguistics degrees. As you can see, the number of graduate degrees in our field has been not completely flat, but relatively flat for both doctorates and master's degrees for the last, 33 years. And that's actually a good sign, right? It means that we're not producing too many MA degrees or too many PhD degrees. We're not just churning out ever more doctors to go out there and not get academic jobs, or ever more MA degree holders to go out there and compete for a limited number of jobs. These numbers are holding very steady, and that's probably a sign of health in our field, especially in light of the fact that the undergraduate degrees really rise considerably over this time period. And that's in part because they start from a very low level. Linguistics was never a thing that you could study as an undergraduate until fairly recently. There really were no bachelor's degrees in linguistics until I guess about the 1980s, and that has grown exponentially over the last couple decades. It appears to be flattening out now to some extent, but this is also good because if there's more people wanting to study linguistics as undergraduates, it means there's going to be more linguistics teaching jobs, and the people doing those jobs are going to be people from these two groups, and there's not such a large increase in them. So this is a very nice picture overall for getting a graduate degree in linguistics. This is at the PhD level, just again thinking for those of you who might want to be pursuing an advanced degree in linguistics. This is all, well, not all, but a lot of the areas of basic linguistics mapped out in 3 ways here, with 3 numbers. So these leftmost bars are how many dissertations appeared, basically how many doctorates were there that mentioned each of these areas. So these are things like phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics, as well as sort of peripheral areas like historical linguistics, sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, computational linguistics. And the leftmost bars here are the number of degrees granted in this 4-year period, 2009 to 2012. The middle bar is all of the academic jobs that were announced in this area on the Linguist List website during that same period, that 4-year period. And the rightmost bar is just the tenure track academic job ads from Linguist List during that period. The tenure track jobs are generally permanent. You have a trial period during which time you need to produce a lot of stuff. And if you do a good enough job, then they give you tenure and you work there forever. The other non-tenure track academic jobs are going to mostly be limited term appointments. In linguistics, most of those are going to take the form of full-time jobs that are 1 or 2 years where you're a visiting professor. You teach maybe 2 or 3 classes, you do some research, you interact with people in the department. These can also be called postdoctoral positions, in which case it's likely to be more research than teaching. But these are good jobs. They just only last a year or two. In other parts of the humanities, a lot of the non-tenure track academic jobs are going to be really poor jobs. They're going to be adjunct or instructor jobs where you get paid a couple $1,000s per class and you're not considered a full-time employee. You probably don't get paid a living wage. You don't have health insurance, things like that. Linguistics is fortunate in a way because we don't have that many undergraduates or that many classes to teach. We don't have a lot of those lecturer or adjunct instructor positions, which is probably a good thing because those positions are really exploitative and are not actually good for the health of education or academia or the people who take those jobs. So you won't find a lot of those in linguistics. Here's what we can broadly see in this plot. Even though we're in pretty good shape in our little field, we are still producing more doctorates than there are academic jobs for those doctorates to fill. And especially true when you consider only permanent or tenure track academic jobs. And, the spreads are worse in some areas of linguistics than others. So at a first pass, phonetics seems to have a pretty good match between the number of dissertations, number of doctors there are in phonetics, and the number of tenure track jobs. That's not that bad for a 4-year period. Syntax, on the other hand, lots and lots of doctors of syntax, not that many tenure track professors of syntax. You better be pretty good like Dr. Stepanovich if you want to get a tenure track job in syntax, is what this chart is telling us. Obviously, Professor Stepanovich is brilliant, but it's hard to get a tenure track job in syntax. You might need to be as brilliant as her in order to do it. And different subfields here have different spreads. So computational linguistics notably has all sorts of academic jobs that are not exactly tenure track professors, but there's lots of employment opportunities with anything computational. Psycholinguistics, language and cognition, there's a little bit less of a mismatch here. Same thing, strangely, historical linguistics, which is at this point an almost moribund field of linguistics, seems to actually have a perfect match between the number of doctors and the number of jobs. And that changes differently for different fields, right? So again, this is more centered around the PhD level. But this is from the National Science Foundation survey that they do every 10 years or so of doctoral recipients. And this is showing us which sectors people with linguistics PhDs are in. So actually, I said this was more relevant to the PhD level. This is PhD level data, but it's actually relevant to everybody. What this is showing you, it's split out by gender here just because that's the way they publish the data. There's very little difference between female and male here. So I would say just look at either one. It doesn't matter. They're basically the same. What we're seeing here is that, as you would expect, the vast majority of people with linguistics PhDs in this survey, which I think attempts to survey everybody who's been granted a degree in the last 10 years or so, the vast majority of those people are in higher education. That is, they're basically working at universities. But there are non-trivial minorities of people who have these PhDs who are working as either the K to 14 means generally public schools, or sorry, primary and secondary schools, whether they're public or private. So basically high school, middle school, elementary school teachers or administrators or something like that. There's a non-trivial minority who end up in those jobs, as well as business or industry. Far less of a population here than you might find in a more sort of technology or computing oriented field. If you made this same graph for, I don't know, for engineering or something like that, the positions of these bars would be reversed. Most people would be making millions of dollars in industry. A few people would be making a lot less money in academia. Linguistics doesn't work that way. So again, you're mostly preparing for a career in the academy. What you can't tell from these graphs are, what percentage of these jobs in K to 14 education, which I believe includes junior colleges, or in, business and industry, did you need a PhD for? And the answer is likely to be nowhere close to all of them, right? So a lot of these jobs in these other two bars are jobs you probably could have gotten with a master's degree. Right? So that is a thing. More generally, linguistics as an academic discipline is a pretty healthy academic discipline. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of these sort of exploitative part-time teaching jobs, and that's a good thing for our program. This is from the Linguistic Society of America annual survey. This is the departments that responded, linguistics departments and programs, responding to say how many job positions they have in their departments at each of these levels, where the first three here are the three ranks of permanent tenured track faculty. An assistant professor is a new tenure track faculty who hasn't been given tenure yet. An associate professor is somebody who has been granted tenure on that track. And a full professor is somebody who's been granted tenure and then produced a bunch more impressive stuff and been given like an extra promotion. So these are people who have been around for a long time. What you can see here is that in the average linguistics department, there's somewhere around like 4.5, 5.5, between 6 and 7 tenured or tenure track positions, and then fewer than 2 other positions. Full-time positions in the United States means that you get benefits, you're probably paid reasonably, you have health care, all of those good things. This is not a terrible job, right? So, and in comparison to that, the average department has only one person who's doing part-time coursework. This is the kind of adjunct instructor type position that might be okay to make ends meet for a year or two, but this is not what you want to do for your career. And elsewhere in the humanities, there is a class of thousands of people, a generation of doctorates who end up doing this kind of adjuncting work for extended periods, moving again and again and again, barely making a living wage. And it is not something that anybody should do with their life. This is partially an attempt to just show you that, thankfully, this doesn't happen in linguistics. Okay, so that's what I have to say about jobs so far. And of course, if you're looking for jobs outside the academy, it's hard for me to cover every single possible area of employment in a lecture like this, but do let me know if you have questions about specific areas that you'd be looking for jobs in, and I can absolutely help you. The next sort of part of the lecture here is going to be about a slightly less conventional topic, but it's going to be about how the American higher education system, basically colleges and universities, how it works and why it works that way.